Hey everyone, Nick here and welcome back to GamingTube, and welcome back to our Little Nightmares character concept series. So in today's video, we'll be talking about the Maid. Some viewers out there have suggested a Maid-like character, so we thought we'd put our own twist on it and tell our own story. So we'll be going into this creepy character's location, their gameplay mechanics, and all that good stuff as well. As always with these videos, we'll just state that these are just some fun and creepy ideas that we can share and make a story out of. Nor do we expect Bandai Namco or Tarsier Studios to really do anything with these ideas or make a third game or a DLC or anything like that. And lastly, before we start today's video, if you could please consider leaving a like, commenting and subscribing, as it helps out a lot and it's greatly appreciated. Alrighty, let's get into the Maid. So in the last character concepts video, we were introduced to the Trouble Child, a young orphan who was secluded and alienated from all the other children. On one tragic day, their orphanage was attacked by a crazed exterminator who was sent to exterminate all the residents of the orphanage. But who they were exactly sent by was never made clear. The Trouble Child and another fellow orphan managed to escape from this mad exterminator and eventually get the best of him. In the end, the two children went separate ways. The kind child was intent on searching for the other orphans, while the Trouble Child had to find out why the exterminator attacked their home and who exactly sent them. The Trouble Child managed to grab that piece of paper off the exterminator in order to find any clues. There's a hand-painted artwork of the orphanage on one side, and then on the other side there was a return to sender address. The Trouble Child crawls into the front seat of the exterminator's truck. They see a strange device with some buttons and a rotating arrow that's pointing towards the orphanage. As they look closer, they see that the address of the orphanage was typed into this device. They grab the device and exit the truck. They punch in the address on the piece of paper and the arrow starts to spin in the other direction. The child takes this device and decides to follow it to the address. This takes them on a journey towards this mysterious destination. For days, they walk to the outskirts of the Pale City and into the wilderness. The device leads them through the dense and lonely forest. After days of walking, they finally reach their destination. In front of them stands a large mansion. This mansion is out in the middle of the forest, almost in the middle of nowhere. The Trouble Child approaches the large building and enters through the front door. As they walk in, they find themselves in a large hall. There's multiple doorways into other rooms, and all over the walls are strange objects hanging up on display. They decide to explore the rooms of the mansion in hopes of finding answers. The first room they come across is the dining room. A large dining table sits in the middle of the room, surrounded by strange statues and artwork. An old grandfather clock ticks away while the Trouble Child walks through this large room. They climb onto the dining table and walk past the candles and silverware. As they traverse this long dining table, they accidentally tip over a crystal wine glass. The glass falls to the ground and shatters into a million pieces. The child freezes for a moment, then all of a sudden, a door opens and a shadowy figure comes rushing through. The child quickly hides behind one of the many candles on the dining room table. As this shadowy character gets closer, it's revealed to be the Maid. The Maid is an awfully strange looking character with an upside down head. Also, she appears to be wearing an old traditional maid's outfit. The Maid looks around to see who dropped this glass. The Trouble Child freezes in fear behind one of the candles and doesn't dare to move a muscle. The Maid goes to clean up all the broken glass, and as she does so, this is now the Trouble Child's chance to get away. In this gameplay segment, the player would have to quickly move from candle to candle and avoid being seen. When the Maid pops her head up to see who's there, the player needs to be careful not to get spotted. When the Maid spots you, she'll quickly grab you and throw you up in the air and catch you in her disturbing upside down mouth. As the child gets to the end of the dining table, the Maid eventually walks off into another room. The Trouble Child walks through the door that the Maid entered, and now they find themselves in the grand study. This room is filled floor to ceiling with large bookshelves filled with many different kinds of books. The Trouble Child decides to climb the bookshelf to get a better look at their surroundings. As they climb the bookshelf, they grab onto one of the books, but it suddenly slides out and off the shelf. But it doesn't fall on the ground. Instead, it only pulls out halfway and makes a strange clicking noise. The troubled child soon realizes that this book is in fact a switch. In this puzzle segment, the player needs to locate all the books on the shelf and figure out which ones are switches and which ones are just ordinary books. The book switches could look different to all the other books. Maybe their spine could be another colour or pattern. Once all the book switches have been located, the bookshelf slides across and reveals a secret room. It seems to be a little office space. There's a desk filled with papers and an old Super 8 projector aimed at a blank screen. They see a bunch of files with a number of strange characters on them. These files appear to be contracts of some sort. Amongst all the contracts, they can see the Maid and even the Exterminator. They climb down from the desk and walk towards the projector. All of a sudden, the lights dim and the projector springs to life. The troubled child stares at the projector as they watch the film. It tells the story of a character called the Owner, a rich business owner who has owned many businesses and enterprises. The film showcases many of their achievements throughout their life. They own a couple of stores, buildings, and their most prized investment, a large leisure cruise designed for luxury vacations for the wealthy and famous. The camera shows a strange imposing figure as it zooms in on them. Just as the character is revealed, the projector flickers off and powers down. The troubled child exits the secret office and heads upstairs. They catch the Maid walking down the hallway with a plate of food. This meal doesn't look like it's for them. The troubled child decides to follow the Maid and see who she's delivering this meal to. In this gameplay segment, the player would have to follow the Maid and be careful not to get too close or she'll discover them and attack the player. Every now and then, the Maid would stop and look over her shoulder. The player would have to quickly hide behind a pot plant or a statue to avoid being seen. The Maid eventually arrives at a large door. The Maid looks around as she enters the room. She closes the door behind her and then locks it. The troubled child quickly runs to the door and tries to open it, but they have no success as the door is locked shut. They notice an air vent in the wall next to the door. They enter the vent to find another way to get into that room. Surely the answers they're looking for must be locked away in that room. As they travel through the air vents, they slip down a steep drop-off. They slide down the air vents and fall out of the exit panel in another room. They now find themselves in the boiler room. They look up at the ceiling and see that there's a hole where the light is peering through. They can hear the Maid right above them. It appears that they are right underneath the room. So the troubled child decides to climb the giant boiler using the levers and valves as leverage. As they climb, their hands and feet are turning all the valves and levers, raising the temperature of the boiler. They're almost at the top until they notice the Maid is right behind them. The Maid stares at them halfway up the boiler as she realizes this little intruder is trying to get into the room. The Maid quickly runs over to the boiler and starts to climb up after them. Whilst climbing up, the Maid's feet and hands are also causing the valves to turn and raise the pressure even more. The Maid goes to reach for the troubled child, but just at the last second, the child pulls back on a lever, releasing a burst of piping hot steam at the Maid's hand. The Maid shrieks in pain as the troubled child continues to climb up to the gap in the ceiling. They finally reach the top and squeeze right through the gap. The Maid squeezes through and tries to grab at them, but she's too late. The troubled child now finds themselves in the owner's living quarters. They look around the dimly lit room and turn around to see a large shadowy figure sitting down at the end of the room. They appear to be sitting in an old armchair and hooked up to many different machines. It's almost like the ones looking after him are desperately trying to keep them alive. The child stares at the shadowy figure, but the shadowy figure just sits there motionless. A gust of wind from an open window blows some papers off from a desk and they conveniently land right next to the troubled child. They take a look at the files and see a photo of their orphanage. The file documents the owner's plans to knock down the orphanage and build another one of their structures. They first had to force any of the occupants out of the building by any means necessary. Hence why the owner sent the exterminator to take out all the children who lived in the orphanage. As they continue to read the document, they hear what sounds like a large truck pull up outside the building. Surely it couldn't be who they think it is. The trouble child drops the document and walks toward the owner. As they get closer and closer, all of a sudden the door slams open. Both the maid and the exterminator rush into the room and try to capture this troublesome child. Just as they're about to grab the child, they hear a loud rumbling. The maid and the exterminator stop as they feel the ground shake beneath them. The boiler down below has become unstable and is about to blow at any second. Just as the two imposing characters rush again to capture the child, the floor underneath them explodes. Everyone falls right through the floor as they hit the boiler room below them. The trouble child comes to as they awaken, luckily unharmed. They look over to the other side of the room as the owner has been crushed by a large pile of wood and the machines that kept him alive. The maid and the exterminator quickly rush past the child to quickly help. They desperately try to grab all the pieces of wood bit by bit in an attempt to save the owner's life. As they try to free the owner, they can hear the beeping of one of their monitors. As they remove all the wood, they hear the beeping flatline. Then the long beep fades away. In a panic, the maid wastes no time running as far away as they can. The exterminator stands there motionless. And then, all of a sudden, the exterminator collapses and falls to the ground. This time, they won't be getting back up. As the maid quickly runs away, she too suddenly stops dead in her tracks. She freezes and falls to the ground as well. The child walks past her. She can see the child exiting the mansion as she closes her eyes for the last time. The child walks down the steps of the mansion and decides to head further into the wilderness. The troubled child decides that they can start a new life where they can be free. No one can ever lock them up in a room. No one can ever chase them down. They were free to be how they've always wanted to be. Alone. Alrighty everyone, that's all we have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider leaving a like, commenting and subscribing as it helps out a lot and it's greatly appreciated. As always, make sure to comment down below what you thought of the Maid character and also what other characters you'd like to see going forward. Alrighty, well, until the next video, I'll catch you later, bye.